This is a WMUR Commitment 2018 special in partnership with St. Anselm College and the New Hampshire Union Leader, the Granite State Debates.
He's the incumbent governor with a well-known New Hampshire political name. Now, Republican Chris Sununu is battling for a second two-year term in the state's top office.
But when you have something good, you got to keep doing it. Stick with what works.
Sununu lives in Newfields. He's married and has 3 children. He graduated from MIT with a degree in civil and environmental engineering and worked cleaning up hazardous waste sites before becoming the CEO of Waterville Valley Resort. He served 3 terms as an executive counselor. In 2016, he was elected governor. Currently, he's the youngest in the nation. He says he's accomplished some of his goals to help families in New Hampshire, like doubling funding for the opioid crisis and making investments in clean water projects.
I have one advocate group, 1.3 million people. That's all I care about.
His Democratic challenger is Molly Kelly, a 5-term state senator who says she's also running with the goal of improving life here in the Granite State.
I'm going to build a New Hampshire that works for everyone and not just a few.
Kelly, who lives in Harrisville, is married and has a daughter, 3 sons, and 7 grandchildren. She graduated from Keene State and earned a law degree from Franklin Pierce. Kelly has served as a financial advisor and run a nonprofit healthcare organization and says she's a progressive who has stood up for improving education and women's rights.
I start with one thing, dignity and respect.
Both candidates hoping to get the votes they need to lead the state.
Tonight, the candidates for governor.
Good evening and welcome to the final night of the 2018 Granite State Debates. I'm WMUR Political Director Adam Sexton, and we are live at the New Hampshire Institute of Politics on the campus of St. Anselm College. Tonight we're going to be hearing from the major party candidates for governor. Questions tonight will be coming from me and our panelists. Candidates will get 1 minute each to answer questions, with 30-second rebuttals allowed at the moderator's discretion. Let's meet our panel of distinguished journalists tonight. They are Casey McDermott from New Hampshire Public Radio, John DeStaso from WMUR, and Dave Solomon from the New Hampshire Union Leader. And our first question tonight comes from John DeStaso.
Good evening, candidates. Ms. Kelly, unemployment in New Hampshire is low right now, 2.3%. The state's median income is one of the highest in the country. Why should Granite Staters want to fire Governor Sununu when things appear to be going quite well?
Thank you for the question. Well, the economy is not working for everyone. Unemployment numbers may be going down, but wages are not going up to keep up with the cost of living. Our colleges, think about our colleges. We are #1 in the nation for how much it costs for a student, for their tuition to go to college, #1. We are also #1 for students in debt for our colleges. The economy is not working for them. We have people who are working 2 or 3 jobs just to put food on the table and pay the bills. We also have our families looking for affordable housing, and property taxes keep going up. So the economy is not working for everyone. There are 44,000 children in our state who are food insecure, which means that they worry about where their next meal is coming from. As governor, I want to make sure that every child has a breakfast in the morning when they start school, and I want to build a New Hampshire that works for everyone and not just a few.
And Governor, while the economy does appear to be strong, it's not perfect. According to some recent numbers, 1 in 4 students in New Hampshire qualifies to get free or reduced lunch at school. How is it that there's this much economic disparity in the state?
Well, again, we are in one of the most robust economic times that we've ever seen. Consumer confidence is at an all-time high, and you noted wages are higher than they've ever been. Wage growth in New Hampshire is higher than almost anywhere else on the East Coast. That's something to be very proud of. We have the lowest poverty rate in the country. The lowest poverty rate in the country. We've created economic prosperity, not just for businesses, but that trickles down to individuals. It trickles down to more money in their pocket, a better quality of life for them. We've seen more money invested into everything from nonprofits to charitable organizations. The economy is really cooking. More than 15,000 people today, more, are working than just last year, more than any other time in our state's history. We have 20,000 available jobs, so there's lots of opportunity out there, high-paying jobs. So again, you don't just take that for granted. We've really created a system and a dynamic that is more customer service friendly, that puts individuals and businesses first and allows them to thrive.
And Governor, speaking of workers, last week we spoke with the owner of a restaurant called 900 Degrees Pizza, which has locations in Manchester and Epping. The owner says she closed their Portsmouth restaurant after only 6 months, partly because they couldn't find people to work there. We've also heard from school districts that can't find bus drivers or substitutes, and the pharmaceutical company MilliporeSigma in Cheshire County is still looking for engineers, technical operators, and logistics warehouse managers. What steps are you taking to address the worker shortage in the state?
We've taken more significant steps than any administration in history. So I'm going to start backwards a little bit. Just last week, we announced a $24 million investment that we're proposing to the university system that'll double the number of healthcare workers. We're focusing on healthcare because that's where one of the biggest shortages are, not just today, but 5 and 10 years down the road. That will double the number of everything from nurses to clinicians, all across the spectrum. And again, it's an investment, it's a one-time investment that pays off for tomorrow. We've invested in student loan repayment programs like never before. Again, allowing students to enter the workforce and giving them that incentive to stay and work here, whether it be in high tech or in nursing. I created the Governor's Scholarship. I'm a big believer that at the age of 18, a diploma is wonderful, but we need to make sure that our students have workforce-ready skills on day one so they can enter the workforce ready to go, or they can go to community college or the four-year college. But the point is that we have to let students design their path forward. We're investing in our career schools, our career and technical schools, $30 million of investment there, again, to really make sure that the students have opportunity while they're still in school, so when they hit the ground running at the age of 18, again, the choices are there for them to remain in New Hampshire.
And Ms. Kelly, what additional steps would you take that you feel are not being addressed at this time?
Well, the workforce issue is a problem for New Hampshire. We have our young people who are leaving our state because they don't see opportunities, and we have businesses and industries who are crying out for a workforce. So education is what we need to focus on. Education has always been my priority as a senator, and it will be as governor. You know, education's personal to me as well. At one time in my life, I was a young single mom with 3 small children, working my way through college so that I would have opportunities and to open up doors of possibilities for my children as well. I know the challenges that working families face, and I know how important it is that we invest not in giving tax breaks to the 3% of the wealthiest corporations, but that we invest in education, job training, and making college affordable.
Our next question comes from Casey McDermott.
Governor Sununu, we're getting a little warm tonight, but winter is coming. Last year, an extreme cold snap created a fuel delivery disaster for some because of perceived shortages and slow delivery times. You said you'd be working with companies to ensure better communication for this year. Please describe what companies you've spoken with and what was accomplished to prepare for this time around.
Well, that cold snap was very significant last year. We were on the phones one-on-one with individuals, people calling into the emergency response center here in New Hampshire, making sure that we had their tanks full, that we were getting the communication piece that was breaking down directly with those fuel companies. The immediate steps that we took is we brought them all in. We brought all those companies in. We sat down with Perry Plummer, the Director of Emergency Management. We made sure that they understood what resources were available to them, what resources are available at the local level in terms of our local emergency response coordinators, who to contact at that level. Again, so the communication can work up the chain. We have a tremendous asset in our emergency response teams here in the state, and they can help provide that communication. Again, Perry, myself, we really took a hands-on effort making sure that, God forbid, an elderly person up in Conway wasn't getting their tank filled. We made sure we had those folks on the phone. We're moving them up the priority list, and we're holding people accountable. The workforce shortage is a piece of this as well. We have to make sure that, again, when you have the unemployment in COAS is lower than that of Massachusetts. So, of course, there's going to be some gaps in the system there, but we really believe that the communication efforts at the state level is really going to make a difference.
Thank you, Governor.
Thank you.
Senator Kelly, as governor, what plan would you put in place to make sure that there aren't delivery shortages or interruptions or customer hardships during the winter months?
Well, as we all know, New Hampshire gets very, very cold, and we've had every year we address these issues as well. So it takes not planning in an emergency, which is important, but planning ahead of time to make sure that we can address those emergencies when they do happen. So it's collaborating ahead, setting up those emergency plans ahead to take care of what we need to do if we have those cold snaps, and we will. The other is that I think the biggest responsibility that a governor has is safety, and that's what we're talking about. We're talking about safety for our elderly so that they're taken care of. We're talking about safety for our children as well in our schools. And as governor, governor, I will make sure that we have a concrete plan to address New Hampshire's cold and snow.
Next question comes from Dave Solomon of the Union Leader.
Thank you. Ms. Kelly, let's move from heating to electricity. As you know, New Hampshire has very high electric costs. Only 5 states in the country have higher electric rates than New Hampshire. So what concrete steps could you take in your earliest days in office to address this problem?
Thank you. We do here in New Hampshire need to put forth an energy plan that I believe is based on science and fact. My opponent has real doubts about the fact that climate change is caused by human behavior, but we do know that. So we need an energy plan that's based on science and fact, and we need to move our state from fossil fuel to renewable energy, and I know how to do that. I did that as a state senator. I introduced and I put forth the very first plan for group net metering, which provided our state to generate its own renewable energy here. I'm so disappointed that my opponent actually vetoed a bill that would expand the possibility of creating and generating more energy, renewable energy here in our state. Renewable energy that produces clean energy, creates jobs, and produces energy even in our small towns, our larger cities, and our schools, which would lower our property taxes and our cost as well.
Governor Sununu, you were invoked on climate change. You have 30 seconds.
Yeah, let's be very clear. Humans have contributed to climate change. That is not a question, contrary to what my opponent may say. I'm the only candidate on this stage that has fought to lower electric rates. I removed the electricity consumption tax. I refused to vote for and support bills that would have raised costs, skyrocketed costs. My opponent mentions the net metering bill. That would have cost over $200 million over the next 10 years. And those costs are borne by low-income families, by the elderly, those on fixed incomes, those who don't get the direct benefit of solar power. The biomass bill, again, $25 million a year. We have to be able, they're tough decisions, but we have to be able to say no and fight for lower rates.
And continuing on this topic, Governor Sununu, explain why you support the Northern Pass project.
Look, when you have 1,100 megawatts of clean, renewable hydropower just a little bit beyond our border, to just ignore the ability to tap into that is irresponsible, I believe. That project would have provided a lot of electricity into our system, into our grid. It was proposed in a very responsible way, bearing the line most of the way. Over 90% of it was in an existing right-of-way. We weren't clear-cutting trees. At the end of the day, it's about lowering rates for individuals that simply can't pay those bills anymore, or the manufacturers or businesses that, again, could save millions of dollars by going out of state. We've been able to attract businesses here, retain them here, because they know they have a governor that fights for lower energy rates every single time. Sometimes they're tough decisions, to be sure, but at the end of the day, you have to put politics aside and just do what's right for the 1.3 million people of this state.
Senator Kelly, why do you oppose the Northern Pass project?
Well, I oppose the Northern Pass because we can do much better. I think that we always have to look at a cost benefit here, and what Northern Pass would do to the environment is costly and hurts New Hampshire. Also, it would affect our economy because of tourism. That's not acceptable, is it? Either. We depend on tourism for our revenue and the economy here. And it also lowered property values, and many of the people who lived in those areas were going to be affected personally with their own property values. Let me just point out one thing here to be clear, is that, you know, I, in this campaign for governor, have not taken $1 from corporations, not $1. My opponent has, and he did receive over $50,000 from Eversource, and I think it's not any coincidence that then he vetoed the renewable energy bill that would expand renewable energy here in our state. And our electric rates, they've gone up. They have not gone down. So I just want to just point that out, that I am going to be a governor that works for the people and not for special corporate interests.
Governor Sununu, you have 30 seconds to respond.
So there's, again, only one candidate here fighting for lower electric rates, and that's clearly not in Eversource's interest. And what my opponent doesn't want to talk about is when she was a state senator, she took thousands of dollars from Eversource. Maggie Hassan took tens of thousands of dollars from Eversource and other utilities. So at the end of the day, it's about doing what's right for the people of New Hampshire. And again, understanding the pushes and pulls of manufacturing. Do businesses support my campaign? You bet they do. Because we've created a regulatory environment that they want to thrive in. We've gotten business, the government out of their way, essentially. We're creating a more customer service friendly aspect, and this is the place businesses want to be.
Senator, you can have about 15 seconds to respond.
I just want to be clear, and I have been clear in this entire campaign, that in this campaign as governor, I have not taken $1, not $1 from corporations, and my opponent has taken over hundreds of thousands of dollars, and also from Eversource.
Okay, let's move on to our next question coming from John DeStaso.
Thank you. Senator Kelly, another emotional issue. Do you think Governor Sununu is doing enough to protect students when it comes to state gun laws and initiatives directed at that issue?
Let me just say, just to clarify here, today I have 4 children. And my husband and I, we also have 7 grandchildren. And when my children went to school, I never worried about them as to whether they'd be affected with gun violence. But I worry every single day about my 7 grandchildren. I will not wait as governor to wait for a tragedy in the state. We do need to do more about common sense gun safety. I disagree with my opponent. As governor, we need to put forth, and I will, universal background checks as well, and red flag laws. Keep guns out of the hands of children and domestic abusers. And the first bill that my opponent signed into law was to allow anyone to carry a concealed weapon without a permit, and I would repeal that. We need to make sure and to keep our children safe in school. They look to us, they trust us, and they expect us to make them safe. And as governor, I will work to be able to do that.
Okay, Governor, when you commissioned a task force earlier this year to study school safety, they didn't look at gun laws or the availability of firearms because it was considered to be sort of a political issue, if I read the report correctly. Why did they not cover that important, what some may say was a very important area?
So the Safe School Task Force that we commissioned was put together with students, with parents, with teachers, with law enforcement, all the stakeholders. And what they put together in terms of the report has now been held up as a national model. Over 50 solid recommendations in terms of how to really make sure we're dealing with the crux of the issue. We invested over $30 million into safe school infrastructure. Over 400 schools across the state got those grants. Previously, no administration had ever invested a dollar there. At the end of the day, we have to get to the core of the issue. That's about the kids. That's about the undiagnosed mental health and illnesses that some of these children have, the fact that we're not providing those wraparound services to them in the schools, communication if a crisis were to happen. We can talk about gun control, but at the end of the day, that doesn't deal with the crux of the problem. We need to make sure we're providing those services in a very safe and responsible manner. We've made bigger investments than any administration ever before in safe schools, and that task force report, again, is a model for the rest of the country.
Thank you. Senator Kelly, you're calling for gun-free zones around schools. Please explain how that would stop a mass shooting, since several schools, including Parkland High in Florida, had that policy in place.
We need to do everything we can to make sure that our schools are safe. And the bill that I'm referring to when you ask that question is a bill that allows the local communities to put into policy their own policies to keep gun safety zones in their schools. My opponent vetoed that bill. It does not support that bill, but we need to be able to move forward and do that. Let me also say that we are just coming off from a week of some terrible events having to do with gun violence, bigotry, and hatred as well. And it was just really a few weeks ago, and I just want to say that guns have to be a part of a discussion. That discussion was not a part of the task force. It is the same as the Trump administration's task force with Betsy DeVos. They didn't talk about guns as well. I will also say it was just a few days ago, just after the event, that my opponent visited a manufacturer of guns in our state and made an announcement that gun sales
Senator
in
Kelly.
this are booming here in New Hampshire.
That's time.
Governor, as your opponent just brought up, New Hampshire does have a long tradition of local control, so why not let towns or school districts decide if they want to have gun-free zones?
Again, it's a matter of the Constitution, right? We are one of the safest states in the country when it comes to firearm safety. And it's a responsibility I think that everyone in the state takes very seriously. We have a wonderful, not just tradition, but we've actually moved forward in terms of making sure that we're dealing with the crux of these issues. You can talk about guns and that political argument all day long, but at the end of the day, are we really providing the services to the individual? Right? To the person that would do harm. A sign isn't going to, if someone has the will to go and shoot up a school or a synagogue, I mean, a sign isn't going to stop that. We need to make sure we're providing those services, making sure kids with a problem don't become a kid in crisis. And that's what that Safe School Task Force report was all about. And that's why it's being heralded across the country nationally. Right? We've really created a model of getting to the crux of these issues, investing dollars in mental health, which we have done, investing dollars in voluntary services with families, same programs that my opponent slashed when she was in the Senate, we've reinstated, and we're being proactive and preventative in our communities.
And Governor, just to follow really quickly, your interpretation of state law on this matter, do you feel it's legal for an adult who is not a student to walk into a school with a concealed weapon?
The Constitution protects that right.
Thank you.
Moving on to our next question from NHPR's Casey McDermott.
Governor Sununu, the state recently announced plans to reimagine its treatment and recovery model around opioids. But in the last year, the state has seen a wave of recovery center closures, some patchy funding at the state level, and uncertain outcomes in some cases for those who rely on those kinds of services. What makes you think this new change in direction will yield better results?
Well, we are taking a drastic change in direction in terms of how we attack the opioid crisis in this state. It starts with, there's a bunch of different pieces here that we really have to be part of the puzzle. The hub and spoke model that I've created really provides access in the rural areas, a barrier that we just hadn't been addressed in so long, so people can get not just treatment and recovery, but those full wraparound services of job placement, recovery housing, MAT, all of these pieces. And we have data now that will actually work with individuals to make sure that they're not falling off the system, they're not relapsing. I invented recovery-friendly workplaces to make sure that the workplace is part of that solution. We've tripled the amount of money into the alcohol fund, and we've done it with a private partnership with the hospitals, which is an enormous opportunity in terms of the funding aspect of it. We went down to Washington, D.C., and we made a case. We said, if you invest in New Hampshire, you allow us to recreate the entire infrastructure of this state. We don't have the bureaucracy. We get results. We can track the data. And already, for the first time in years, we're seeing overdoses and deaths go down in this state. We have a long way to go to be sure. But this new model, this tangible model, can really provide access to services that previously were not there.
Senator Kelly, on day one, what specific thing will you do differently? And again, we're looking for a concrete policy that you plan to take if elected.
Well, I think it's always hard to say one thing. I will just tell you, on the first day that I'm in office as governor, I will make sure that every child in the classroom is not hungry and has had breakfast. And we can do that. We can pour all the money that we want into education, but if our children are hungry in schools, they won't learn. So that's number one. The other is this opiate epidemic is a crisis. It is an epidemic, and we must address it. There is not a family in this state who has not been affected by this epidemic and continues not to be. So we do need to address it, and I would put forth an emergency plan to address the issue of treatment, prevention, and recovery, and to make sure that the children who are the real victims of this disease as well are supported, and their caregivers as well. The program that my opponent is talking about was a program that was put together not by bringing everyone to the table at the beginning, but a program that was put forth to be implemented. And we know that there are hospitals here in Manchester and also in Nashua who are not a part of this plan to move forward. So I would put a plan together.
Governor Sununu, you were invoked.
To respond to that,
30 seconds.
The hub and spoke model is based with hospitals in the background. We asked hospitals all across the state. The hospitals in Manchester and Nashua chose not to participate, but that's okay. We have Granite Pathways, a great organization that can provide that. But let's be very clear. My opponent was just asked to give any specifics, even just one, on how she would deal with the opioid crisis. Nothing. Not a single concrete answer. She was asked about fuel. Nothing. She was asked about the economy. Nothing. They asked about student debt. I've yet to hear a single idea about where we need to go, what we need to implement. You have to understand how these systems work to know how they're going to be implemented. And again, it's all about just getting the best results for the people in New Hampshire.
Senator Kelly, you can respond.
Yes, I would like to respond to that. I was a state senator for 10 years. I got things done, and I know how to get things done. So my opponent is not correct. I have put legislation together with many, many details. My opioid plan does have a detail as well, as I talked about. I was the first senator to put forth a renewable energy group net metering bill that has made a real difference in the state. I know how to put legislation together. I know the details. I know how it works. And I will just tell you that if there is a piece of legislation.
Senator, that's time. Moving to the next question from Dave Solomon.
Governor, in your campaign, you expressed support for the concept of paid family medical leave that would enable people to take care of a sick relative or deal with the birth of a child without losing income.
Sure.
But when the House passed a bill along those lines, you voiced your opposition and it died in the Senate. Now, in this campaign, you're again stating support for a program of paid family and medical leave. So what would a program look like that you could support? How would it be funded? What kind of benefits would it provide?
Well, as you stated, I support paid family medical leave. And of course, it's not a vacation. It's not. But what the Democrats did with their bill, they twisted it into an income tax. They took a good idea and twisted it into an income tax, which is never in the interest of the state of New Hampshire. My plan is very simple. We're going to provide a public-private partnership that actually, my plan will include the state employees. Hers does not. My plan has no startup costs. Her plan has almost $20 million in startup costs. My plan makes sure that businesses below 50 employees can actually participate. Her plan doesn't. And when the commissioners of the state, the experts in the state, went before the legislature, they said they couldn't certify it be financially solvent. It could potentially go bankrupt. How could, as a governor, you support a plan knowing that a single mom might pay into the plan, and then a couple years down the road when she goes to collect the benefits, it's not there for her? That would be massively irresponsible. So we've created a public-private partnership that really provides a voluntary action. Employees can opt in, they can opt out. It's really up to them. It's an exciting time because this would be a new model for the rest of the country, and it doesn't create an income tax.
That's time.
Ms. Kelly, you've made paid family and medical leave a centerpiece of your campaign. So we'd like to hear the details of what plan you would support, and don't you agree that the governor has valid concerns about the plan that was proposed in the legislature?
Well, let me just say that paid family medical leave is important to the people in the state. And it did pass, the bill, HB bill, passed 3 times bipartisan in the House, and then my opponent stopped it when it was in the Senate. My opponent had an opportunity to put a plan forward. He had a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and he was governor, and he didn't do it. Now he's talking about another plan. He had that opportunity. We need to build on the House plan that we have and to move forward on that House plan. I, as governor, will make paid family medical leave a reality because it is simply about people being with those they love the most when they're needed the most without having to make a decision about whether they are going to lose their job, not pay their mortgage, or put food on the table. So the House bill that passed 3 times bipartisan, it's a good bill to move forward, and that's what my plan would be.
I'd like to respond to that. You know, my opponent has talked about how passionate she is about paid family medical leave. I get concerned that we would have a potential governor that would not listen to the experts, that would move forward even though the plan could go bankrupt. So I want to know why my opponent would support such a plan even though the experts say don't. And twice, when she was a state senator in 2007, 2009, this same bill was put forward. The Democrats controlled the House, the Senate, and the governor's office, yet she didn't even co-sponsor it. I want to know why.
I do support paid. I do support paid family medical leave, and will make paid family medical leave a reality. As I said, my opponent had the opportunity, didn't do it, and then later called it a vacation. So I do question the commitment to putting forth a paid family leave, and it is not an income tax. Calling this an income tax is an old play out of some playbook that anytime a Republican has not an answer as to where to go, they use this as really a political ploy and call it an income tax.
Governor, you have 15 seconds to respond.
Again, my opponent had the chance to support it when she was a senator. Didn't even put her name on it to co-sponsor it. And when you have a program that needs a public notary to certify you getting out of the tax, that's a trap, trapping everybody in. And then you have no option to opt out, right? That's a trap, right? That's a trap, Governor, because they know they need so many people trapped into the system to make it viable.
Next question comes from Casey McDermott.
Senator Kelly, what can you realistically accomplish right away if elected?
Well, you know what I want to do is to build a New Hampshire that works for everyone. And so I am going to focus immediately on the budget and make education a priority in my budget. And that's what I will do immediately. We must invest in education, in public education. I will not ever support a voucher program. I would veto a voucher program. You know that my opponent, that's his piece of legislation that he says if reelected, he wants to bring back, and he's standing with Betsy DeVos on that. So it's education, moving that forward in the budget. I believe that every child, no matter where they live, where they were born, or what their family's income, has a right to education and a public education, and that's what I would do on my first day, to put legislation through.
Governor, you were invoked, but you can answer to the question.
We have put more money to public education this past year than ever before. And when we talk about safe school infrastructure, $30 million. There was only one governor in this state that ever even proposed full-day kindergarten, and we got it done. And it's returning millions of dollars back to property taxpayers, back to the cities and towns, so they can make that investment for their kids. We've moved the ball forward in public education. And the bill that my opponent responded to, that bill only allowed flexibility for folks at the federal poverty level and below. Those at the most lowest income scale, those are the only ones that can participate, because it's all about equal opportunity. It's all about giving a low-income family the same opportunity as everybody else.
Governor, that's a rebuttal, and we have a follow on the question.
You bet.
Governor, what haven't you accomplished yet that you would make a priority if reelected?
Well, I think to the tone of your question, we've accomplished a lot, right? We've really covered everything from better health care and more choices for veterans and seniors. We've raised rates. I think the next thing we really need to focus on is the workforce initiative. Why I'm focusing so much investment into the university system to double the number of healthcare workers in the state. I think that instead of making government bigger this way, we have to really look at addressing, we've created such a robust economy with such high wages. We are a victim, frankly, of that success, in that it's hard to bring workers in. I put 33 more DCYF workers to really address the issues with abused kids in the state. We're still having trouble filling those positions. So we have to look at increasing the wages there to make sure that we're competitive, and those folks on the front lines of issues like mental health, opioids, abused kids, whatever it is, we've created the positions, but now we have to get our pay commensurate, given that our economy is so strong.
Thank you for the answer there. Next question is about veterans. We know that New Hampshire has a large veterans population, so we went to the VA Medical Center in Manchester to find out what was on the minds of our state's veterans and the issues most important to them. Here is former Army nurse Diane Klotz on her top concern as a veteran.
Get all of our homeless veterans into housing, some kind of housing, schools that are closing or nursing homes that are closing. There's got to be somewhere to put these veterans that are homeless and get them the care that they need.
Senator Kelly, first to you. What can the state do for our homeless veterans?
Well, I will just say here's a very good example that New Hampshire is not working for everyone. We are talking about veterans who are homeless. They must be our priority. What they have done with their lives and given for all of us, and that we have veterans here in our state who are homeless, is unacceptable. And we need to be able to fund housing and to provide workforce and job training to our veterans, who are the very first people that are there for us, and we need to be there for them.
Governor Sununu, same to you. What to do about homeless veterans?
You know, this is one of those issues where one is too many, right? We know that if we even got that number down to one homeless veteran, it's too many. So on issues of homelessness, given our very robust economy, we are very aggressive right off the bat. And I'm going to evoke the story of when I brought all my commissioners, and we slept out on the streets of Manchester with Child and Family Services. We raised over $30,000 to bring awareness to the homelessness issue across the state in every community. It affects a lot of people. Tonight, on any given night, about 300 kids will be homeless in Manchester, right? That's a travesty. So of course we have to be out front. And it isn't just with funding. It's with spearheading the efforts. It's with working with the nonprofits that are providing those opportunities for individuals. In the issue with veterans, it's working with everything from the VA hospital to the mental illness issues that often co-occur with homelessness. Making sure we're reaching out to them, not as an institution, not just by throwing money at it, by really reaching out to them as individuals, one-on-one, finding where the system failed them, where those gaps in services really are. That's how you get the best results. And given the kind of small state we have, the low bureaucracy, we can really have the opportunity to wade through as individuals.
Thank you, Governor. Let's take a little bit of a breather with a lightning round here. First off, to Senator Kelly, should the governor's term be 4 years?
I think 2 is good.
How about you, Governor Sununu?
Boy, I love the accountability of 2, but yeah, I think it should be 4 years, to be honest. I mean, accountability is great. Maybe it's just because I hate campaigning. I mean, I hate going. I love the job. But I just don't. I don't care for campaigning that much.
Okay, Governor, pretend you just won the Mega Millions jackpot. What's the first charity you're going to donate to, and why?
Well, I'm a big fan of Best Buddies. They work with the developmentally disabled community. My wife and I spend a lot of time with them. And City Year, those are probably my 2 big ones here in New Hampshire, Best Buddies and City Year.
Senator, you hit the jackpot in Mega Millions. Who are you donating to?
It would be to organizations and nonprofit that handle the homeless, and I think you can hear as well, it would also be to organizations that are providing meals for our children who I am concerned are worried every day about where their next meal is coming from.
All right, Senator, we just all survived another Halloween night. Senator, what was your favorite Halloween costume of yours of all time?
Wonder Woman.
All right, Governor?
I'm a big fan. I was a unicorn, so.
All right. Governor, do you support online voter registration?
Online voter registration? No. Again, I think to be able to go into the town hall and actually, present yourself is important.
Senator, how about you? Online voter registration?
I would move forward on to really take a serious look at online registration. It's done in other states, and I think the most important thing is that we make sure that everyone who's eligible to vote is voting and is out voting and making it as accessible as we can.
Senator, you're starting a new business and you have to hire Chris Sununu as part of it. What job do you give him?
What job would you like? What job would I give you? Well, you could greet people when they come in, because you love to greet people and shake hands.
And Governor, you're starting a new business and you have to hire Molly Kelly. What job does she get?
VP of Customer Service.
All right, there we go. Governor, would you support an independent HR unit at the State House to investigate workplace harassment?
I would support that, sure. I mean, workplace harassment is something that you have to deal with whether you're in the private or the public sector. So, yeah, absolutely.
And Senator, how about you? Independent
yes,
HR at the State House?
I agree. It's, there is no tolerance, and we do need to have accountability, and I would agree with that.
Okay, and finishing on a light note, Senator, what was your first pet and what was its name?
Callie. It's a cat.
Governor?
Thumper. He was a rabbit.
Okay. And now both of you have to change your internet passwords.
There you go.
Okay, next question comes from John DeStaso.
Yes, thank you, Adam. Something that affects every Granite Stater just about every day are roads and bridges. So last year, Senator Kelly, the governor effectively vetoed a turnpike toll hike that would have generated about $37 million to accelerate infrastructure projects. The governor said he was, quote, fighting for the working men and women of New Hampshire. Was this a good idea given the condition of our infrastructure, and would you commit to doing the same and blocking such a hike if you were in office?
I would not raise the tolls today. What we do need to focus on, though, is to modernize and to make safe our infrastructure. Our economy depends on it. Our safety depends on it as well. And that's where my focus would be of how we could do that. And we also need to bring commuter rail to New Hampshire. It is finally time to do that. We know that that will bring economic prosperity to our state, keep our young people here as well. My opponent was against it, then for it, and then against it. I have always supported commuter rail, and I do know that there was a business in Londonderry recently that left and moved to Massachusetts because there was no commuter rail here in New Hampshire. So I would support commuter rail and move forward to make that happen.
Governor, you have 30 seconds to respond.
So the idea of raising gas taxes came to us. I said absolutely not. The raising tolls came to us. I said absolutely not. That's about $400 or $500 on commuters. With better management, and we've proven it, with better management, we've been able to make bigger investments in roads and bridges than ever before. We put $35 million with our surplus funds, because we managed, back to cities and towns for their own roads and bridges, offsetting property taxes. That's how we're able to offset and provide financial flexibility at a local level. We put another $20 million into red-listed bridges, again, over and above what was already planned. We didn't have to raise taxes to do that. We didn't have to talk about gas taxes and toll taxes. We got it done with good management.
Governor. Okay, moving to our next question now, coming from Casey McDermott.
New Hampshire's diversity or lack thereof has been the subject of high-profile business conferences and listening sessions this year, but some of the people who've participated in those forums have received threats or other messages telling them that they should leave the state if they're not happy with it the way it is. Senator Kelly, what's one thing that you've done as a public servant to meaningfully address diversity in New Hampshire?
Well, I certainly have worked. I started in my consulting business, a Center for Civic Engagement, and I brought people together to communicate who have different thoughts, different feelings, to come together and to have discussions in a civil manner so that we can solve some of these problems and keep our doors open. You know, as I said earlier, we are just coming off a week of really tragedy based on bigotry and hatred. And bigotry and hatred are not acceptable here in this state. And it comes from truly a fear and a mistrust of the other. And it must stop. And as well, I believe that words of hate are causing and creating even more problems and spreading and dividing us, and in particular, not opening our doors up to each other. So as governor, two of the things that are most important to me is dignity and respect, and any policy and any law that we enact must also be a part and to move forward to implement that legislation that would provide dignity, respect for all of the people here in New Hampshire.
Governor, to you, what do you think that said about our state or says about our state that people received harassment as a result of those forums?
Well, again, you know, when it comes to harassment, we have an absolute zero tolerance policy. And to your question, you want to know specifics that we've taken. Well, the first thing we did is we set up a civil rights unit within the Attorney General's office. Why previous governors hadn't done that, I don't know. We did it, and we got it done. And then we've got very proactive, and I created the Governor's Commission on Diversity and Inclusion. This commission has been charged with and has been going out, not just holding the public meetings all across the state, which have been very valuable, but bringing in that information and understanding where we need to provide better training, where the issues of implicit bias come from, and again, making sure that, you know, we can't just be a state of tolerance. We must be a state of acceptance, right? That's the real fundamental goal that we have to get to. We have to accept one another, and we have to break down, even as Molly said, she's right, we have to break down this polarization, this negativity, right? I don't know what's been happening out of Washington, D.C., all the negative politics, but it has really changed the culture in terms of how we treat one another. I'm one of those ones that say social media is the bane of human existence, right? Because it allows for that negativity. So we have to take personal responsibility in terms of how we're going to change the culture of the state and move forward in a very productive way.
Okay, next question comes from Dave Solomon.
Governor Sununu, the state does have a low unemployment rate, as you pointed out, but much of the economic growth has taken place in the southern 4 counties of the state. There's a variety of economic analysis that show the northern part of the state is still suffering in many ways from the Great Recession. Do you agree that the North Country has been left behind, and what is your strategy for spreading prosperity more evenly across the state?
Well, equality in our prosperity was an issue with us on day one, which is why one of the first things I did is I traveled to Canada. And I met with 50 or 60 companies. No governor in 10 years had traveled to Canada, even though they're our #1 trading partner. So we went right up there, knowing that when they want to expand into the United States, right here in New Hampshire is the great opportunity. And we've been able to bring companies down into the state. When you're looking at counties like Coos and Grafton and Carroll County that are always at a bit of a disadvantage, we've still been able to get the unemployment rate of those counties lower than that of Massachusetts. Right? We had the best increase in population in the state, in this state across New England, better than even Massachusetts. We had a net influx of migration in. Massachusetts was out. So we're really turning the table. We're investing in community college programs and job training programs. We're allowing students at 18 years old to take advantage of the Governor's Scholarship, which allows them to find their workforce pathway. By creating opportunities for the individual, we're much more likely to retain the workforce across this state, regardless of where you live.
Thank you, Governor.
To you, Senator Kelly, what strategies would you bring to the table to spread some of this economic prosperity northward?
Well, I think it really does come down again to workforce and education. So as you hear, education, job training, and making college affordable is a necessity for us to move our economy. As the state senator for 8 years, I chaired the Advanced Manufacturing Education Advisory Council. It is a model where I brought together educators who are leaders, as well as manufacturers who are CEO, moving people out of their separate silos, working together to create a prepared workforce for manufacturing, which in the North Country and other parts of the state are important. Those are the models that I would bring together as governor and continue, whether it's in manufacturing, whether it's high-tech, finance, or to move into healthcare. And that's the direction that we need to go. And I have done it, and I will continue to do it as governor.
Next question comes from Casey McDermott.
Governor Sununu, you've said investments in child protection are a top priority for your administration, but the state is still spending less now on DCYF, the Division for Children, Youth and Families, than it spent in 2011. And that was before the opioid crisis really ramped up and also before several very well publicized deaths of young children. Why is that funding still not up to where it was?
Well, again, I think to the crux of your question, that's how low the funding was before we put $10, $15 million into these programs, right? We reinstated voluntary services for families, a program that my opponent in the Senate slashed when dealt with the budget issue. We've created 33 new positions at DCYF. We moved out bad management. We brought in a world-class team. For the first time ever, we have a child advocate in the state of New Hampshire that fights for the rights of the individual, for the children. Right? We're getting the, when we came in, there were over 3,000 untouched cases of potentially abused kids. So we brought in the private sector to get that number down. At one time, when we, back in 2016, when I was first running, the average child caseworker had up to 90 cases they had to deal with. That's down to 30, 35 cases. Now, there's still some work to do, to be sure, but we've made those investments. The most comprehensive child welfare reform bill in decades, frankly, Bill 590 that we just signed a few months ago, making huge progress moving forward. But again, you have to have the workforce, right? You have to be able to pay comparative wages and move the ball forward with real results.
Senator Kelly, you were invoked. 30 seconds.
Yes, I just want to say that my opponent is wrong about slashing a budget. When those really deep cuts were taking place, I did not support the budget. I actually voted against that budget. And I think it's always interesting when your opponent is, I think, nervous or getting desperate in a campaign to start to attack you about your strengths. I have been an advocate for children my entire life, and I have been an advocate for children every day in the state Senate.
You know, 15 seconds, Governor.
Look, I think the results speak for themselves. Those programs were slashed. We reinstated them. Those employees were slashed. We increased the number of employees that, again, are on the front lines. Not top-level management, but real frontline workers that can spend the time one-on-one with these kids and these families to get them better results.
Okay, let's move to our next question from John DeStaso.
Yes, public education and taxes. It's been more than 20 years after the Claremont Court decision required the state to fund public education adequately. But the same kind of funding and property tax disparities that led to the lawsuit still exist. In the recent school year, the Rye School District spent $19,000 per pupil, while Pittsfield spent less than $15,000, despite having a much higher property tax rate. Ostensibly, people pay more, but they get less in these districts. In addition, state grants meant to help poorer districts are now being phased out. For Governor Sununu, what is your solution to this seemingly unending, relentless problem?
You know, unfortunately, about 20 years ago, we really limited the legislature's ability to tackle the issue of education funding. The courts dictate a formula, and of course the courts have to make sure that an adequate education is being provided. But they really started dictating the formula. You know, our legislature is one of the greatest assets we have. 400 representatives. It's the most representative legislative body on the planet. That's a tool, that's an asset for individuals. They should have the power of the purse to be able to adequately address these discrepancies. Right now, they basically touch a little bit with these adequacy grants, and those are being phased out. We need to allow them the power of the purse, not the governor, right? The legislature, because that's the voice of the people. And long term, I think that's where you get to be able to adequately address the discrepancies between towns. Now again, we've put more money to public education than ever before. We've put our $30 million into the Safe School Infrastructure Grants, which offset some of the property tax burdens at a local level, but give the power of the purse to the legislature where it belongs.
And Senator Kelly, the same question to you, but I'd also ask you to address, while addressing this, how can you do that and still keep your promise? How can you fulfill the court order and still keep your promise to veto a broad-based tax?
Yes, and I have been clear, I do not support income or a sales tax. And we have a $12 billion budget, and this is what we need to do. As I said earlier, every child, no matter where they're born, where they live, or what income their parents have a right to a public education. So it's the top of the budget. When something's important to you, that's what you put at the top of your budget. We also are giving, my opponent has given 3% of our wealthiest corporations are receiving tax breaks. We need to invest that in education and job training. And as well, I would veto a voucher program that my opponent supports that takes money from public education, moves it into private and religious schools, weakens public education, raises our property taxes. We need to strengthen public education. I believe that public education is a tenet, a core tenet of democracy, and if we erode public education, we are eroding democracy, and it's unacceptable.
Senator, we want to get to a few more questions, but 15 seconds, Governor, for the attack.
My opponent's record on taxes is very clear. She raised taxes over 50 times when she was a state senator. The LLC tax, the business taxes, a canoe tax, for goodness sakes. And her own words to the Keene Sentinel, her own words, when it comes to a sales and income tax, everything's on the table. Those are her words, not mine. And this 3%,
Governor,
I'd like for her to explain the 3%. Business taxes, the business tax cuts we have affected every business.
You can have 15 seconds,
What's 3%?
Senator.
Yes. I will not, and I've been clear, support a sales or income tax, and I will veto as well. Again, I believe that every time a Democrat is running against a Republican, that is the attack. It is an attack that I think people are tired of, that voters are smarter about, and I think that's why he's bringing it up.
Next question coming from Dave Solomon.
Governor Sununu, a commission that's of legislators and other stakeholders has spent the past year studying the question of legalizing recreational marijuana in New Hampshire and has released its report without taking a position one way or another, just offering a detailed analysis. And it concludes that the state could make up to $50 million a year taxing the legalized marijuana. Isn't that a lot of money to leave on the table?
I've been more progressive with marijuana legislation than any governor in history. We decriminalized it, which means we got our penalties finally in line, something that the Democrat governors before me refused to do. We expanded the use in medical marijuana. But when you're talking about the single biggest health crisis this state has ever faced with drugs, full-blown legalization of marijuana, now is not the time. I mean, Governor Hickenlooper was here campaigning with my opponent earlier this week. Go ask him, are the death rates and overdose rates down in Colorado, the most progressive state with legalization of marijuana? No, they're up. So the ideas of harm reduction simply aren't there. And the idea that we want to legalize something just so we can tax it, I think that's the absolute wrong direction, right? We have surplus funds right now. So before we take that step, and it is a big leap, look at the states around us. Massachusetts, Maine, Vermont, they don't even know how to implement it. They're struggling to figure out the implementation of it. So the fact that the Democrat Party as a whole has embraced the full-blown legalization of marijuana, I think that's a very dangerous place to be given the severity of our health crisis. We're making investments in the opioid crisis, in addiction, and we have to have those results before we move forward.
Well, Senator Kelly, we know that you support legalizing recreational marijuana. It's part of the Democratic Party platform. So should this come to pass, do you believe individual cities and towns should have the right to ban sales within their borders, or should that be part of a statewide protocol?
You are correct that I do support legalizing marijuana and highly, highly regulating marijuana and taxing it as well. So I think it's a state's responsibility. We put it through state legislation. I would support it. And through the process that we go through in the House, the Senate, and legislation, we will bring forward a bill to legalize marijuana that works for New Hampshire, and I think we should do it on a state level. I do not believe that it is a pathway to any other drugs. In fact, I think just the opposite. It keeps these drugs out of the hands of drug dealers and people away from drug dealers, and we need to address the opiate epidemic, as I had said earlier.
We're going to move to our closing statements now, and the first statement is going to be given by Molly Kelly.
Yes, well, thank you. It's been great to have a discussion about the issues that I think are facing New Hampshire that are really challenging, and I hope you had an opportunity to hear some of the differences between myself and my opponent. Even to begin with, education, it is a priority. Would not support a voucher program as my opponent does to weaken education. I want to strengthen education. I think you heard that the governor thinks that our gun laws are fine and that gun sales are booming. I believe that we need common sense gun safety, and I have not taken any dollars from corporations as my opponent has, so I will not owe corporations anything. I will be a governor that works for the people, and I believe that we need to move forward away from words of hate, and leaders must not be silent, and I believe that we need to move forward with dignity and respect when we make policies, and as governor, that's what I'll do.
And now a closing statement from Governor Chris Sununu.
Well, thank you very much. Look, when we came on board just 2 years ago, we had one philosophy: put politics aside and get the job done. And that's exactly what we did. That's why we've been so successful. That's how we got kindergarten done. That's how we've gotten healthcare reform done. That's how we've provided better healthcare choices for veterans and seniors. You go down the line, mental health, a new infrastructure for opioids, where we're actually seeing those results. And it's wonderful. Those results have yielded the support of folks across the state, Republican, Democrat, Independent. They're lining up behind us. The firefighters union, the state troopers, the police association, newspapers from the Portsmouth Herald to the Union Leader are lining up behind us because they know that when you just look around, the success is evident in every single place we've touched. Now, as governor, you have to know how these programs get implemented. You can't just buy into the negative political rhetoric that's out there, right? There's a lot of negativity, a lot of polarization. We don't do that. We work positively, collaboratively, across the aisle. We get things done. The results really speak for themselves. It's been a heck of a campaign. I think the results are out there. There's still more work to do, and I hope to earn your vote on Tuesday.
Thank you very much to the candidates. Thank you to the audience, and thank you to those watching at home. If you want to watch any part or listen to any part of this debate again or share it with anyone, you'll find it in the Commitment 2018 section of WMUR.com and our mobile app. You will also find information about polling locations and voter registration. Of course, you can join us Monday night for an Election Eve special covering all the candidates, the issues, and the last-minute campaigning before Tuesday's midterm election. On Election Day, we'll have live coverage on the air, online, and on social media all day long. Of course, thank you again for watching, and be sure to get out there and vote on Tuesday. Thank you and good night from St. Anselm College.
Thank you, Molly. Good job. Good job.